We approach donor engagement and donor experience in a systematic way, but always starting from a point of empathy and a point of higher purpose. We don't start with an engineering flow diagram. For any meaningful experience to start, one needs to build trust, and there's no trust to be built without warmth and without competence. Nobody would allow themselves to be stuck with a needle unless they trusted and they felt good about the person on the other end.
Hello and welcome. I'm Chris Malone, and I'll be your host for today's discussion. Thank you for joining us. To get us started, I'd like to once again welcome our friend, colleague, and my sometimes co-host, Michael Giuliano. Michael is president of Planetree, which is a global not-for-profit organization dedicated to humanizing healthcare for everyone through excellence in person-centered care. Welcome, Michael. What can you tell us about today's guest?
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone to this April episode of Humanizing Healthcare. It's great to have you with us. I'm very excited to welcome our guest today. Adrian David is the Enterprise Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for Blood and Laboratory Operations for New York Blood Center Enterprises. As a leader, Adrian combines scientific and engineering expertise with strategy and business acumen. At New York Blood Center, he has reimagined the organization, putting it on a growth trajectory while adding capabilities to support sustainability and resilience. Adrian joined the New York Blood Center in 2023. Previously, he was with Bristol Myers Squibb for over 19 years, leading in a variety of roles, most recently as head of cell therapy network strategy. During his time at BMS, Adrian developed an expertise in operations and strategy, applicable to manufacturing network, supply chain, and product portfolio optimization. Adrian is passionate about developing high-performing teams, coaching and mentoring, and the ability of new technologies to make a difference for everyone in healthcare. Adrian's highly educated, so I'll list some degrees. He holds an undergraduate degree in chemistry and 3 master's degrees in chemistry, chemical engineering, and business administration, so an overachiever, from Case Western Reserve University, Penn State University, and NYU Stern School of Business, respectively. I'm really looking forward to this discussion because it will definitely provide a different perspective about experience from donors and caregivers as well. So back to you, Chris, and welcome, Adrian.
Thanks, Michael. Welcome, Adrian.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, thank you for joining us. So, Adrian, you've had a very interesting career path. What led you to join New York Blood Center, one of the nation's largest blood banks, after such a long tenure in the pharmaceutical manufacturing? Can you share the story of how all that came about?
Yes, it was really unexpected, Chris. So to start with, I had the privilege of a nonlinear career trajectory with a multinational biopharma company, and I worked in the 3 key verticals of that company. I started out in R&D, but also transitioned to technical operations and also worked in commercial and covered all major modalities from small molecules to millimolecules, biologics, and finally cell therapy. And it was the latter that likely caught the attention of the recruiting search company because there are many common areas between transfusion medicine and cell therapy. In fact, if one thinks about it, transfusions were the first form of cell therapy since the real live cells are transfused into a patient. But really, it wasn't until I learned more about the New York Blood Center Enterprises that I became very interested in joining this organization. It was truly my interview with our CEO, Dr. Chris Hillier, that tipped the scales. His vision of an organization committed to serving patients, hospitals, communities through innovation and science had an immediate impact. And I said, that's the organization for me. It's been like that ever since.
Awesome. Now, you mentioned New York Blood Center Enterprises. For those that may not be familiar with the organization, can you talk about the difference between New York Blood Center Enterprises, and the nonprofit status of both of those?
The New York Blood Center actually was founded in 1963 through corporate institutional collaboration and funding from the Rockefeller Foundation. So it was really centered on the state of New York and the surroundings of New York City. So we have a history of over 60 years of life-saving research, innovation, and impact. The Enterprises was formed through a series of acquisitions and integrations of other blood centers. So currently we operate in 17 states with 56 brick and mortar donor centers, and we run about 10,000 blood drives throughout all those communities each year. So in addition to that, New York Blood Center Enterprises, this new entity spanning over 17 states, delivers not just blood collections and products, but cellular therapies, specialty pharmacy services, medical services for research, academic, and biopharmaceutical companies.
So that's quite a diverse range of activity. So what does your role as Chief Operating Officer of Blood and Laboratory Operations include?
Yeah, and I should say a little bit more about the structure of the organization. So at the core, the enterprise is the Blood and Laboratory Business Unit, which I am leading. That's the backbone of the organization. It supplies about 1 million blood products to over 400 hospitals across the United States. But in addition to this core business or core activity, the New York Blood Center Enterprises also has a world-renowned research institute. It's called the Lindsley F. Kimball Research Institute, and it's known to those in the world of hematology and transfusion medicine. Our institute is really a leader in those areas and is dedicated to the study and prevention, treatment, and cure of bloodborne and blood-related diseases. And our investigators have made substantial contributions towards the understanding and combating various diseases, transmittable diseases, and genetic diseases, things like leukemia, sickle cell, and so on. So aside from the Research Institute, we also have a cell solution business unit that provides cell and gene therapy services to customers in the biopharmaceutical world. And last but not least, we also have a for-profit arm. So this is a spin-off from New York Blood Center. That's the New York Blood Center Ventures. And it invests in early and mid-stage companies who have promising technologies supporting our ecosystem of hematology and transfusion medicine.
Wow. So it's quite diverse, and it's now, based on what you've described, very connected to both the pharmaceutical world and the healthcare provider world, I gather.
It is, and it's all with this purpose of ultimately benefiting the patient from all possible angles and bringing our expertise together and providing that evolution, not just simply providing a product, but truly providing hope, long-term hope.
Excellent. And so what things are you focused on in your role, and what are your priorities since you've joined the organization?
So as COO, I oversee the entire value stream of blood products, from donor marketing, donor acquisition and recruitment, to collections, component manufacturing, which is actually the fractionation of the collected blood into its key components, such as red cells, platelets, and plasma. Those are actually the components that get transfused. In addition to that, I oversee laboratories, quality control, immunohematology, infectious disease testing, genomics, and other types of laboratories. In addition to that, I'm responsible for hospital services, distribution, and client relations. So it's really this continuum end to end, from recruitment to supply of product to our hospital customers.
Wow. And so you mentioned the breadth of your organization in terms of geographic presence. Can you give us a sense as to how many donations or how many blood drives or how many donors you touch on an annual basis, anything like that?
We collect and distribute approximately 1 million blood products annually. And we have approximately 500,000 current or regular donors.
Wow.
So it is a complex operation, and we are a 24-hour, 365 days a week operation. We do get calls in the middle of the night on a holiday to provide a very specialty product that perfectly matches a patient in need.
Wow. And so what are some of the challenges and priorities that you're addressing in the organization? I know that things got really tricky during COVID and the pandemic and so forth. And while some aspects of that are behind us, others may not. What are you focused on now to this year?
So indeed, the pandemic caused an issue throughout the industry, not just at the New York Blood Center Enterprises, with where blood shortages became more common. Of course, during the restrictions with COVID, people could not leave their homes or would not feel comfortable to leave their homes. There's been definitely a decline in youth donorship, which is impacting us because without youth, we do not refill our funnel of dedicated donors, and we're very focused on bringing them back. Of course, that is always a challenge, and it's more of a challenge nowadays because youth donors are changing their preferences more frequently than maybe other generations. So youth donors, everybody knows they're the most socially engaged generation ever. Nevertheless, they are also the subject of constant bombardment from every institution out there. So there's a fight for their attention from everyone, and it's difficult to get to them. But we believe we have we're better than others at capturing that spirit of social engagement that they have.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the other things that I think is interesting is that New York Blood Center, brings the drive to the donors in many respects. With mobile drives, there were, I think, 10,000 drives you mentioned annually. And last year, you launched your first of its kind donation experience featuring state-of-the-art mobile blood donation pods. And I was wondering if you could tell more about that and how you expect it to impact the experience that donors have as a result of that innovation.
Well, thank you for that question. That's actually a project I'm very passionate about. So as stated before, we operate about 56 brick and mortar donor centers. We also hold about 10,000 mobile drives throughout communities every year. So that makes it about 200 drives per week. So we were looking to on how to bridge the fixed location with the mobile drives that operate once. Basically, it's a one-day affair. So we were looking for something that would provide us a temporary, an extended but temporary solution. And these pods, interestingly, they're a concept that comes from other industries. You can see them at events, at concerts. You can see them with car races and so on, and they at trade shows. And they're very modern and very accommodating. And our pods are portable, are real portable donor centers, equipped with very comfortable donation beds. They're climate controlled. There are entertainment options. There's access to streaming services and so on. So they really provide us with that kind of intermediate hybrid solution between a fixed site and a mobile experience, which the mobile piece looks like almost like an infirmary that one sets up for the day, and then you just move on to the next mobile location the next day. But having something for a week or two in one location really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And from what I've seen from the photographs, it's kind of like, fits on the back of a tractor trailer. It's not a bus or something like that, but it's kind of a tractor trailer, transported thing. They unload it. It kind of expands. And inside, it's like kind of a pop-up, clinic or donation center, essentially equipped with all the high-tech equipment and beds and all of that you'd find in a fixed donation center.
Exactly. We've gotten a lot of media attention with the pods, and certainly our donors were very appreciative of this new setting for donation.
Good, good. Now, many of our listeners are professionals in the business of patient experience. And I'm wondering, in your view, how blood donors are similar to or different from healthcare patients, to the degree to which those lasting relationships matter, how and why they develop, that kind of thing. What are your thoughts on the similarities or differences between delivering a donor experience and a patient experience?
That's an excellent question. I'll say that while there are parts of the experience that are alike to a patient journey, some of our donor centers look like outpatient clinics, but the reality is the motivation is quite different. So unlike patients, donors don't have an ailment that they are trying to alleviate. Patients are care receivers, whereas donors could be classified as caregivers. They are really giving part of their body at the expense of their time and emotional effort to help patients in need. And while blood donors are quite unique and distinct, They do, in fact, share characteristics with other subgroups, including patients, but they could also share characteristics with social investors, philanthropists, then other kinds of benefactors, caretakers, community organizers, and even share characteristics with regular consumers and customers. But they're quite distinct in their way, and that's why we have a very tailored approach. We do not easily or simply borrow an approach from another industry and says this fits the donor concept. Our constituents are very different.
Yeah. And of course, another reason is that patients come to healthcare providers to receive care because they need, some kind of treatment or what have you. What motivates people to be donors? They aren't receiving really anything, arguably. What in your experience motivates them? And to what extent are you able to focus on what is their motivation?
We presume that each donor is unique and has their own motivation. But in general, altruism and a desire to help others, help the community, save lives is a major driver. And even if it's not the primary motivation, it does play a role one way or another. Many people come in because of a sense of duty and responsibility to the community. Some of them have personal connections with patients through family or friendships. Some donate because of peer influence, such as when we hold mobile drives at institutions. So whether it's a religious institution or an educational institution, people kind of take on each other and say, hey, I'm donating. Would you like to come by? So there's that peer influence. There are the feelings of accomplishment that come at the end that many people really feel like I've done something meaningful and tangible. Some people told us that they come in for staff interactions. There's an epidemic of loneliness in this country, and you'd be surprised how many people enjoy being in a chair for a length of time and chatting about their daily lives with our staff. And I'll tell you a funny story. I go to drives frequently, and I went to a high school drive, and I asked two young students what brought them to donate, and they started laughing. They said they dared each other. Who dared to have their needle stuck in their arm? So motivations can really differ from person to person. We have the whole spectrum, but at the end of the day, altruism, I will say, beats all the other.
Got it. And that being the case, I wonder, are there ways that you try to design, manage, and deliver donor experiences that kind of deliver on what they're looking for altruism-wise? Do you have staff or resources the way many healthcare providers do for patient experience? How does that work in your world?
So first of all, we approach donor engagement and donor experience in a systematic way, but always starting from a point of empathy and a point of higher purpose. We don't start with an engineering flow diagram. We start from what is the emotion involved in this? And we're striving to understand the feelings, the impressions, the opportunities for human connection associated with every stage in the donor's journey. So not just an aggregate, but at every stage in the journey. And we train our staff, build our systems, and design our processes around that concept. So our approach is, in fact, anchored into the concept of warmth and competence that you detailed in your book, the human brand. And yes, we do have a dedicated department, which we call donor engagement. And part of that department is a subgroup called donor experience. In general, we try to stay away from giving department names that suggest an activity, like marketing. Marketing is an activity. Donor engagement is a statement of a desired outcome. So we go with department names that tell us where we really want to go. Donor experience, donor engagement.
You make a very good point. Despite those very striking differences between donors and patients and what they motivated by and so forth, it's striking that they both are in many respects looking for the same things, right? Experiences that reflect warmth and competence that result in relationships, and that they share with their healthcare provider experiences as well.
Yeah, it's the experience, but for any meaningful experience to start, one needs to build trust, and there's no trust to be built without warmth and without competence. I mean, nobody would allow themselves to be stuck with a needle unless they trusted and they felt good about the person on the other end.
Yeah, of course. And I'll wonder whether donors are able to ever find out about how their blood or their product benefited a recipient. Is that something that is possible? And if so, how do you do that in today's HIPAA privacy, environment and requirements?
Yeah, totally. So we have two mechanisms for that. One is an anonymous mechanism. It's a program called Thank the Donor, which is an app-based system which allows blood recipients and their loved ones to send thank you notes anonymously to the donor. So there's no privacy concern there because both the sender and the recipient remain anonymous in the process. However, we have intermediated and continue to intermediate meetings between donors and patients with the appropriate legally approved consent forms and so on. And many recipients actually are very interested in meeting their donors, which is a wonderful event and celebration when we have the opportunity to facilitate that.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. Let's talk about another side of experience that our healthcare audience is also really interested in. That's the frontline team members. How do you manage the engagement of your frontline team members? Do you have any mechanisms or approaches to that? Because, if we want those donors to have a great, warm, competent, and relational experience, how do we ensure that that is something that is, delivered by and engaged in by our frontline folks?
Yeah, I mean, really, this is at the core of our philosophy that it takes highly engaged employees that work very well together as a team to provide the kind of care and service and experience that we strive to provide for our donors and customers. So we have designed a series of programs and activities that ensure that our teams are fully buy into our mission. They understand that everything they do could have direct consequences on patients literally fighting for their lives. So from our recruiting process to onboarding and training, we focus a lot on the why before we talk about the how. So we have recently introduced the donor experience training course. It's mandatory for both new and existing employees. And that complements our very rigorous technical training. Moreover, we have created an incentive program that links a donor's propensity to return for additional donations with the rewards given to the phlebotomist that performed the last service for that donor. So there's a direct correlation. If the service was good, if the interaction was good, then it's more likely for a donor to return. So we've made that connection, and our phlebotomists are quite appreciative of that recognition when they're able to provide that superior service. Mm-hmm. And finally, we have a redesigned donor survey that has substantially increased the participation rate of our donors. So we're very happy with that. And we're getting live instant feedback, and we can connect that feedback to a location, even to a phlebotomist, and so we can take meaningful action and also spread best practices. Every time we get the positive feedback, it's an opportunity for us to take that model and make sure that it's implemented across our enterprise.
Excellent. And, do you find that those phlebotomists and frontline team members buy into the mission and purpose of the organization? And if so, does that, impact how long they stay with the organization? Or, what does tenure typically look like? Do you have a lot of people coming and going, or do you have many longtime employees?
They do tend to stay. So, like everyone else, after the pandemic, there was a wave of, that things were a little bit in flux. But today we have a very healthy contingent in the middle, people with tenures between 5 to 15 years. And we also have a sizable contingent of folks who've been with us 20, 25 years, even over 30 years. So they're clearly dedicated, lifers for the mission. And then we have somewhere around 20-something% newer people with a lesser tenure. But we're very thrilled to have them because that points out to the fact that this profession is of interest to a younger generation, to a new set of people, and we think that we're very flattered to see that these people find us an employer of choice.
Now, you've been an active mentor and coach for young leaders at both Bristol Myers Squibb and New York Blood Center Enterprises. What advice or insights can you share with listeners who are aspiring to become senior leaders in their organization? Are there any rules of thumb or watch outs or advice you can offer to them, based on your experiences?
This has been probably the topic of many books written, so I'll try to be concise here. I summarize this as such. Senior leadership is really about constantly recharting the path towards the strategic vision, that North Star people talk about. And even though you have a destination, the way you get there takes various turns, and you constantly have to adjust the path in order to mitigate the emerging risks, the unexpected opportunities, and so on. So making decisions under high uncertainty levels and ambiguity requires an educated confidence, because otherwise, then decisions would be just reckless. So you have to have an educated confidence. So to gain that educated confidence, one must practice being in unfamiliar territory. And that typically involves broadening one's horizon both horizontally and vertically. So it's great to work in different departments, different places, but it's also critically important to have verticality. That means to really explore the depth of a topic and be able to appreciate and experience that depth of expertise. So I think both are important. And I think they're essential for anyone who aspires to be in senior leadership.
Wise advice. Wise advice. Now let's take some questions from those listening remotely. Is it correct and appropriate to call donors of any form as caregivers versus, say, care enablers, given the differences between professional clinician caregivers and so forth? What are your thoughts on that? Is that confuse the language, or is that a term we can apply more broadly, caregiver?
It was not my intent to have that taken literally. With all respect to the healthcare professionals who administer care on a daily basis, but our donors truly do care and do care for patients in their way. But that's not to detract anything from the professional healthcare givers out there, which we very much feel that we're partners for.
Yeah. And they are giving something that enables care. And so they are givers in that regard. Also, another question, you've had a long career in the biopharma industry, but it seems your role at the New York Blood Center is very different. And does it feel more human or more relational than the roles that you had at Bristol Myers Squibb? So you feel in any way closer to the people that are giving and receiving care than you did before?
Yeah, and in some ways, I mean, the when you work for big pharma companies, not all roles in a pharma company are literally interacting with the recipient of care or the medicine that the biopharma receives. Of course, at Bristol Myers Squibb, the company was really very patient focused, and everything that we did there was oriented towards patient care. But in the blood center world, it is unavoidable. It is not a choice. One has to be in contact, has to relate to the donors and frequently to the patients. We have medical experts who get calls in the middle of the night from a surgeon who asks, is my patient, what kind of particular specialty blood may my patient need for their specific circumstance? So the level of interaction is very high, and we're constantly very close to the care that's being delivered to the patient in one way or another.
Yeah. And so for listeners who might be interested, what are some of the ways they can support that work that New York Blood Center and New York Blood Center Enterprises are doing? Is it something that is, only applies if you're in one of those 17 states, or are there other things that they can do wherever they may be around the world to support this broader mission that you have?
The need for blood really never stops. It's constant. And while on a national level, the supply of blood is barely sufficient, on occasion, there are significant shortages that apply at a particular point in time and space. So there may be a location during an event or during the holidays when there are fewer donors, when the need for blood grows. It's very important for everyone to understand their civic duty of either donating or educating themselves on the importance of donation. Every third person in one form or another will need a blood product of some kind in their lifetime. So that hopefully will resonate with our audience today, that it's not something that happens to other people. It can happen to any of us. And it's good to be educated and understand what.
And we all rely on it. We take it for granted in some respects when we go to receive care, but there's something in the background that enables that that's really critically important. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I have just one question more for you, and it's my closing question every episode, and that is, do you have a favorite quote you can share? And if so, why is it your favorite quote?
So it's obviously related to my chosen profession with the blood center. It's a quote that's been attributed to Winston Churchill. It says, "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." So I think it's very appropriate for working at a blood center.
Well, I think it's highly appropriate for our discussion today, not only for those that give the gift of life through blood products, but also all of those caregivers that use that product to give care and life to others. And so it's really fitting. So Adrian, thank you. I can't thank you enough for your time and insight today. I'm sure our listeners would agree that the innovation is thriving at New York Blood Center Enterprises. To our listeners, thank you for joining us as well. Hope you found this informative and inspiring, as I have. Be sure to also join us for our next Humanizing Healthcare discussion. We will be talking with Amy Searles, the Chief Experience Officer for Prime Healthcare, and we'll be sharing insights that you won't hear anywhere else. Thanks very much and have a terrific rest of your day.